Hi, how's it going? Hello everyone. Today I'm going to take a look at another Hone welder, in this case the FC140. I recently looked at a Hone 185D stick welder, and while it wasn't perfect, it was a decent machine for the price, so I was excited to try out this potentially very versatile machine. As you can see, I obviously decided to start out with the machine already apart, and unfortunately a few issues jumped out right away, so let's dive right in. The front panel looks a little busy, but it's actually a pretty simple machine. There's a single button for selecting between stick, flux core with 030 wire, flux core with 035, or lift start TIG. There's two knobs. This one sets your amperage output, or wire feed speed if you're in flux core mode. And this knob right here, the only thing it does is when you're in flux core, you can fine tune the voltage up or down from the position that they call standard. So it's a synergic welder, but you can tweak the voltage up or down. A little bit, within what it says on the gauge here at least, is up or down plus or minus 2 volts. You've got the connector here for the switch on the MIG gun. You have the connector for the MIG gun, which they actually just kind of use a DINS connector with a hole through it to run the wire through. And then you have your positive and negative connections for work clamp, and then also for when stick welding or TIG welding. Then on the back, power switch and a little fan inlet. Pretty standard stuff. It does come with, honestly, one of the better wire brushes and chipping hammers that I've seen come with a cheap machine. They're certainly nothing, to speak super highly of, but they're better than the cheap stuff that comes with a lot of these kind of machines. And in fact, I'd actually personally rather they not include these and put that money into the machine to make the machine nicer. But let's keep going. It comes with a very basic shoulder strap. An extra nozzle for the gun, and a bunch of extra contact tips, which is kind of nice. And there are some sized for 030 wire and some sized for 035 wire in there. The MIG gun is one of the lightest and cheapest feeling I've ever held. It's not a big deal as long as it works, but it doesn't feel like something that would hold up well to any abuse or hard use. The work clamp and electrode holder are cheap, but they're okay. The cables are quite thin at roughly 6 gauge, and they are aluminum conductors. When I opened the machine, several things caught my attention, but the first one was this screw, or I should say lack of screw. I did not remove this screw, it was just not there. But clearly there was a screw there at one point. It wasn't loose in the machine that I've found, and it's so close to the side of the case that I don't even know if it could back out fully with the case installed. So it was clearly removed at one point and not put back. Kind of strange. Also, the circuit board is right against the outer metal case here. And there is a relatively thick insulating sheet here between the board and the outer case, which is nice, but it's just not done very well. Around the screws, there are places where like through-hole wires and component pins are pushing on the plastic so hard that they're deforming it, or I don't know if it's just plastic or some kind of, I think it's more like fiberglass, but it's being deformed so much, it's discoloring. And in fact, maybe that's even why they took this screw out, because you can see here, one of the pins behind has actually poked completely through this piece of plastic. It's just not a good, well thought out design. If nothing else, it seems like they should have simply made the case slightly larger to give more room for things. And that trend continues when you see the power cord just pressed up against this capacitor here on the board. And when you see this output cable jammed between the capacitors on this little front panel board as well. Another odd thing is that on the back of that heatsink, you can see that there is like an imprint, like something was screwed to that heatsink at one point, but there's no component on this board for that, so obviously something was changed at some point. Not really a problem, just kind of interesting. The wire drive system is plastic, pretty simple, pretty standard for a machine like this. The drive wheel is very easy to change, and it does have grooves for 030 and 035 wire. So as long as it holds up, really no issue there. I don't really have an issue with a plastic drive mechanism on a machine like this. I've had plastic drive mechanisms on other machines that had no problem. The spool holder is also very easy to use, very simple. So no problems there. It's not adjustable, but on a machine like this, I doubt you'd ever really need to adjust it. One thing to note with a machine this small, you're definitely not going to be fitting anything other than like the 1 or 2 pound spools in here. Quickly before I start welding, I just wanted to point out something I found on the work clamp. When I went to clamp it to the first part, I noticed that this little braided copper strap that's inside here actually isn't connected on the one side. It's supposed to be kind of clamped underneath the little copper plated jaws. They're steel, but they're copper plated. It's supposed to kind of be clamped underneath that piece of the jaw on both sides. It's actually just completely loose on one side. I didn't pull on it or anything, it's just the way it was. Not a huge deal and wouldn't be too difficult to fix, just thought I'd point it out. It runs pretty good. The arc isn't as smooth as some other welders I've used, but it's not too bad, and even the wire feeding with this setup is actually fine. The wire feed speed did fluctuate a tiny bit once or twice, but I think it was just because I had the MIG gun at a little bit of a sharp angle, and I don't have the tension very high because I don't like that it kind of crushes the wire and puts deep grooves in it, because then that actually affects feeding, because then the wire is really rough trying to slide through the sleeve. But it wasn't hard to find a pretty good balance, and then it ran pretty good. And when maxed out, it does provide pretty close to 140 amps. So the machine can do what it says it can do as far as output on flux core. When running maxed out, it draws about 40 amps from the wall, so bear in mind, if you want to run very long welds, even a 20 amp breaker will trip eventually, and a 15 amp will trip pretty quick. When turned down from max, the output isn't too far off from what's on the display. It's not perfect though, but that's actually to be expected because flux core, like other wire feed processes, it's actually constant voltage, not constant current. So the machine actually isn't trying to achieve a specific amperage output, despite that that's what the setting is. It's actually just maintaining a specific voltage, and then the wire feed speed, depending on how much wire you're forcing into the weld, that's how much amperage you're going to pull. So in terms of actually hitting the output that is set on the machine, it's really just a balancing act of getting, the voltage and wire feed speed matched up to give the amount of output that it says. And it comes fairly close, so no problem there. If you just want a really smooth running flux core machine, and flux core is pretty much going to be what you're primarily going to focus on, there's probably better running machines than this if you're willing to spend a tiny bit more. Even something like the titanium Flux 125 from Harbor Freight, it runs a little bit smoother than this. But this is a little bit cheaper, and it does run okay with flux core. As for stick welding, it doesn't seem to have a very aggressive hot start. It does seem to have a little bit of an arc force going on, but nothing too extreme. Overall, it's not the hardest starting machine, it's not the easiest starting, it's fine. Once running, the arc is plenty smooth. It runs 70-18, 60-13, 70-14, all just fine, and it runs 60-11 just fine, but it does not run 60-10, unsurprisingly. Unfortunately, maximum output when running stick isn't quite 140 amps, even when set at 140 amps. You get a little bit closer to 125 to 130, and then it, maybe because of the arc force setting, it will occasionally jump up as high as 140 amps, but it's not really running there. And that trend pretty much follows as you turn the amperage down. So when set at, say, 90 amps, you get maybe a little bit closer to 80, 85. Set at 80, somewhere in the 70s. Still not too far off, and it's still pretty decent output for a 120 volt welder on, stick welding. Bearing in mind, the draw is pretty high, and I'm generally running like 2.5 to 3 inch welds while I'm testing a machine like this and letting things cool in between, because I would trip a breaker if I tried to run a very long weld, with this thing maxed out. But for a quick repair to get something done, it can run a 1/8 inch 70-18 just fine on 120 volts. So even though it doesn't match the output that it says it has, it's not too bad. I have not tested lift start TIG yet on this machine, and the reason for that is just because I'm actually planning a separate video where I'm going to test the lift start TIG on several different machines, including this one. So keep an eye out for that video, but As of now, I haven't tested lift start TIG on this machine yet. However, I am mildly skeptical that it's a true lift start and not just scratch start, only because the open circuit voltage is identical in lift TIG mode and in stick mode. But in that upcoming video, I'll be testing all of that, so at that point we'll find out for sure. Overall, it's a pretty versatile and surprisingly capable machine for a little 120 volt, $120 welder, and it just really is kind of amazing what you can get these days for barely over $100. With that said, I still hesitate to give this a full recommendation just because of some of the build quality concerns, maybe minor safety concerns even with that board being so close to the side, some of the little assembly quirks and things like that. If you pick something like this up and it works for you and you're getting stuff done with it, that's great. I have no problem with that, but I still don't know that I personally would recommend this just because of those issues. Personally, I would recommend just saving up a little bit, get something a little bit nicer, but that's just me. But either way, I've hopefully given you an idea of the capabilities, at least in terms of flux and stick welding, and you can make your own decision on what's going to be right for you. And like I said, if lift TIG is what you're most interested in, stay tuned for an upcoming video. I can't say exactly when that'll be. You know how my videos are. If you've been watching me for very long, they come out when they come out. I'm really busy. I get to things when I can, but I will be doing that hopefully sooner than later. And as always with machines like this is a sample size of one, and I've done some testing with it over a couple days, but it's not like I've put years of use on it, so I can't say how well it'll hold up long term. All I can tell you is what my experience has been in the time that I've been testing it. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, post them up down below and I'll answer if I can. As always, thank you for watching. Take care.